I was standing on the fourth step of the metal bleachers at my grandson's high school football game, holding two paper cups of hot coffee, and my thighs completely locked up on me. If you give me just a few minutes of your time right now, I promise I will share the exact daily fuel I use so you never have to feel that kind of public embarrassment and physical helplessness. The marching band was playing down on the field, the crowd was moving up the narrow stairs past me, and my legs simply refused to push my body up to the fifth step. The muscle fibers in my quadriceps started to tremble uncontrollably under my jeans. I had to turn sideways, pretend I was looking for someone in the crowd, and let a stream of teenagers squeeze past me while I stood there anchored to the aluminum grate. My wife Linda was already up in our seats, waving her hand at me, and I physically could not get to her. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, breathing heavy, waiting for the burning in my legs to subside enough just to take one more single step. When I finally made it to the top and sat down, I handed Linda her coffee, and my hands were shaking. I stared down at the football field, but I did not watch a single play of that game. That was the exact moment the heavy wall of pride completely collapsed inside my chest. I realized that the slight hesitation I had been feeling on the front porch steps, the way I had started looking for handrails everywhere I went, and the heavy, dead feeling in my legs every afternoon were not just passing aches. My physical foundation was failing, I was losing my independence in plain sight, and I was deeply terrified of what was coming next. When you spend over 3 decades managing logistics and moving heavy freight for a living, you treat your body like a piece of leased industrial equipment. You do not worry about the maintenance until something finally breaks. I spent my entire career walking miles around a massive shipping facility over on the east side of town, pushing my physical limits every single shift. My legs were always my strongest asset. They were the foundation that paid my mortgage and put my kids through school. But when the alarm clock stopped ringing at 4 in the morning and I finally retired, that daily mechanical load vanished. I traded a life of constant heavy motion for a life of quiet rest, completely unaware that resting was the exact thing tearing my foundation apart. It crept in so slowly I barely noticed it at first. I started sitting more. I started taking the easy way around the yard. And slowly, silently, my body started stripping the muscle right off my frame because I was no longer giving it a reason to keep it. It was not until I was trapped on those bleachers, unable to climb a simple set of stairs, that I realized how much ground I had already lost. I did not want to tell anyone what happened at the stadium. Most men from my generation are built exactly the same way. We would rather swallow broken glass than look our families in the eye and admit our bodies are losing their power. We just push through the fear, ignore the weakness, and pretend everything is perfectly fine until the day we take a bad fall and end up staring at the ceiling of a hospital room. I was heading straight down that path of silence, but my daughter Megan catches everything. She is an occupational therapist. She spends her entire week working with older folks who have lost their mobility, folks who ignored the exact same warning signs I was having until their legs simply gave out entirely. She came over for Sunday dinner the next day. I tried to walk normally, but my thighs were incredibly sore from the strain of the bleachers, and I was walking stiffly. She pulled out a dining chair, sat me down, and looked right at me. I finally told her what happened at the football game. She did not lecture me. She did not act surprised. She just told me what she sees at her clinic every single day. She explained that the sudden weakness I felt was not some mysterious disease of old age. It was the direct result of a body that was structurally starving. She opened her bag and pulled out a stack of papers. It was a clinical study she'd been reviewing for her patients. It tracked a large group of senior men and women over a 15-year period. The numbers on that page burned themselves into my memory. The study proved that without deliberate daily nutritional intervention, Folks our age can lose up to 3 to 5% of their total muscle mass every single decade after 60. And the very first place that structural starvation shows up is in the power, the endurance, and the stability of the lower legs. My legs were not failing just because I was 73. My legs were failing because I was feeding them the exact same empty calories I ate when I was 30, expecting my older digestive system to somehow build muscle out of thin air. Sitting there at the table looking at those numbers, I felt a cold wave of realization wash over me. I realized that if I did not fix this, the bleachers were just the beginning. The steps to my own bedroom would become a mountain. The trips out to the driveway to work on my truck would stop entirely. The ability to chase my 4 grandkids around the backyard would disappear. So I decided to build a defense right then and there. I started reading. I started asking questions. I started looking at the exact mechanics of how an aging muscle operates and what specific raw materials it needs to survive. After months of trial, error, and paying very close attention to how my body responded, I tracked down a specific list of 8 exact foods that completely changed the landscape of my lower body. I realized my legs were desperately begging for these exact 8 building blocks. I am going to walk you through all 8 of them right now. I will tell you exactly what they do and why your legs are starving without them. And I need you to pay very close attention to the 8th food on this list. It is something almost no one associates with leg strength, but it was the exact key that finally removed the heavy, deep exhaustion from my lower half. Let us start with the first food I had to bring back into my life. For years, I believed the television programs that told us eating fat and eating eggs would ruin our hearts. I spent the last 20 years eating plain dry toast and a bowl of oat cereal for breakfast. I thought I was being incredibly disciplined. I was completely wrong. The villain here is the fear of dietary cholesterol. When you eat nothing but empty carbohydrates for breakfast, you are denying your body the exact trigger it needs to build muscle. My daughter Megan explained to me that whole eggs contain a massive dose of an amino acid called leucine. Leucine is the literal ignition switch for muscle synthesis. When you are 20, your body can build muscle easily. When you are over 60, your body requires a huge concentrated dose of leucine just to turn the engine on. Without it, your body simply consumes its own muscle tissue for energy. I read a piece of clinical observation she gave me showing that seniors who ate whole eggs in the morning retained a drastically higher percentage of their leg strength compared to those who ate cereal. The muscle fibers finally had the spark they needed. I started eating 3 whole eggs every single morning. I shared this with an old buddy of mine from the warehouse named Arthur. Arthur is 68 years old, spent 20 years driving a forklift, and he was complaining to me over coffee that he felt trapped in his own recliner at home. He said his legs felt hollow every morning, and he had to rock back and forth 3 times just to build enough momentum to stand up. He was eating plain oatmeal every day. I told him about the ignition switch. I told him his legs were starving for leucine. He started eating 3 eggs with his coffee. It took about 2 months, but we were standing in the parking lot of the hardware store when he told me the hollow feeling in his thighs was completely gone. He said he was rising out of booths at the diner with one smooth motion. He finally gave his engine the heavy fuel it was missing. The second food I had to learn about targets the absolute most painful part of the aging body, the joints connecting those leg muscles. When we get older, our knees and hips start to grind. Every time I stood up from a low chair, my knees would pop and burn. I thought it was just the cartilage wearing away, bone rubbing on bone. What I did not know, and what nobody ever bothers to explain, is that a massive amount of that joint stiffness is actually chronic inflammation trapped inside the connective tissue. It is like trying to operate a door hinge that is packed full of sand. I found a piece of research tracking older adults with severe lower body stiffness. The group that consumed high levels of marine omega-3 fatty acids saw a massive reduction in joint friction and a huge increase in their walking endurance. I realized my joints were just dry and inflamed. That is when I started eating canned sardines packed in olive oil twice a week. I know a lot of folks hate the smell or the idea of them, but they are the absolute most concentrated source of pure, unpolluted omega-3s you can find. They act like a direct shot of heavy grease to your rusty internal hinges. I gave this habit to a guy named Carl. Carl is 66 and works for my son Derek's commercial heating and air conditioning business. Carl was getting to the point where his knees were so stiff he had to pull himself up a flight of stairs using both hands on the handrail. He thought his career was over. I told Carl what I learned about the inflammation and the sardines. Carl was desperate enough to try it. He started keeping a few tins in his lunch cooler. It was not a fast fix, but about 3 months later, Carl sat down with my son and told him the sharp, grinding pain in his knees was fading away. He said his legs were finally carrying the load smoothly again. He put the grease back in the hinges. That brings me to the third vital piece of this puzzle, and this one addresses the burning sensation you feel when you try to walk up a steep hill. We all know that heavy, burning feeling in our thighs when we carry groceries up the driveway. We think it means we are just out of shape. The truth is that burning is your muscles suffocating. As we age, our blood vessels naturally become stiffer and narrower. When you ask your leg muscles to work hard, they need a massive rush of oxygen. But because your pipes are narrow, the blood cannot get there fast enough. The muscles choke, they burn, and they force you to sit down. I read a fascinating paper looking at hundreds of seniors, proving that consuming natural dietary nitrates completely opened up their blood vessels, acting like a highway widening project inside their legs. I started drinking a small glass of pure, cold-pressed beet juice every afternoon, and I started adding roasted beets to my dinners. Beets are packed with nitrates, which your body converts into nitric oxide. Nitric oxide forces your stiff blood vessels to relax and expand. My neighbor Henry is 75. He loves his vegetable garden more than anything, but he was giving up his evening walks because his thighs would start screaming for air after just 10 minutes on a slight incline. He thought his lungs were failing. I told him his lungs were fine. His pipes were just too narrow. I told him to start drinking the beet juice. A week and a half later, I was out washing my truck when he walked over to the fence. He grabbed the top of the chain link and told me he had walked the full 2-mile loop at the park, including the big hill at the back, without stopping once. The oxygen was finally reaching the muscle tissue. The suffocation was over. The fourth food I had to bring back into my life is the one that prevents the terrifying overnight deterioration. For the longest time, I believed the popular advice that you should never eat anything after 6 o'clock in the evening. I would go to bed with a slightly empty stomach thinking I was keeping my weight down. What I did not realize was that by fasting for 12 or 14 hours every night, I was forcing my body to find energy somewhere else, and the easiest place for an older body to steal energy from is your leg muscles. I was literally cannibalizing my own thighs while I slept. I would wake up, put my feet on the floor, and my legs would feel like dead weights. Megan showed me a clinical observation of older patients proving that a slow digesting protein consumed before bed completely stopped this overnight muscle wasting. That is when I started eating a small bowl of full-fat cottage cheese about an hour before I went to sleep. Cottage cheese is loaded with casein protein. Unlike the protein in eggs or meat that digests quickly, casein forms a gel in your stomach and provides a slow, steady drip of amino acids into your bloodstream all night long. It builds a protective wall around your muscles while you sleep. I shared this with an old friend from our church named Thomas. Thomas is 71, and he was complaining that he felt weaker in the morning than he did when he went to bed. He was skipping dinner entirely to try and lose his belly. I sat with him in the pew after service and told him he was eating his own legs. I told him about the cottage cheese. He listened. A month later, I saw Thomas climbing the wooden stairs to the choir loft. He told me he was waking up feeling solid, planted, and ready to move. He stopped the overnight theft. The fifth piece of this foundation is the one that handles the cramps and the spasms. For years, I fell into the trap of eating a strict low-carbohydrate diet. Every magazine said it was the only way for older folks to stay healthy. I pushed the potatoes and the beans off my plate. By doing that, I was draining massive amounts of water and potassium right out of my muscle cells. Potassium is the mineral that balances the fluid inside the muscle belly. Without it, your muscles dry up from the inside out. They become tight, brittle, and incredibly prone to violent spasms the second you put any real pressure on them. I found a study tracking older adults who deliberately increased their daily potassium intake from whole food sources. The results showed a massive reduction in exercise-induced fatigue and cramping. I realized my legs were just dehydrated of minerals. I started eating black beans several times a week. Black beans are an absolute powerhouse of potassium, magnesium, and slow-burning complex carbohydrates. They fill the muscle with the exact fluid balance it needs to contract smoothly. I shared this realization with a guy named Bill, an old fishing buddy of mine. Bill had actually sold his aluminum fishing boat because his legs would cramp up so violently while trying to balance on the deck that he almost fell in the water twice. He thought his fishing days were over. I told him his legs were just starving for fluid balance. I told him to add a heavy portion of black beans to his meals. 2 months later, Bill sent me a photograph of himself standing on the deck of a brand new boat, holding a massive bass. His stride was steady. His muscles finally had the hydration they needed to contract and release smoothly. The sixth food I had to incorporate addresses the electrical wiring of the body. As we get older, we subconsciously start dragging our feet. We stumble on flat rugs. We hesitate before stepping off a curb. We think it is just a loss of balance. But balance is an electrical signal sent from your brain down your spine to your feet. Those nerves are wrapped in a protective coating called the myelin sheath, much like the rubber insulation on a copper wire. If you do not feed your body the right fats, that insulation frays and wears thin. When that happens, the electrical signal short circuits. That tiny delay is why we stumble. I read about a controlled trial where seniors who supplemented their diet with specific tree nuts saw a measurable, significant improvement in their motor control and walking speed. I realized my wiring was fraying. I started keeping a jar of raw walnuts on the kitchen counter. Walnuts are packed with a very specific type of fatty acid that directly supports the health of the nervous system and repairs that myelin sheath. My wife Linda is the one who proved this to me. We were walking out to the mailbox one afternoon, and she stepped on a wet patch of leaves on the concrete. Her foot slipped just an inch, and her entire body panicked. She could not correct her balance fast enough and almost went down hard. She realized she had 0 reaction time left in her ankles. I started making sure we both ate a handful of those walnuts every single day. Within a few weeks, the hesitation in her step vanished. The next time it rained, she walked across the porch, stepping squarely and firmly. The reflex was moving fast and clear, all because we fixed the insulation on the wires. The seventh food is the absolute ultimate waste removal system. Every time you use your legs, whether you're walking to the mailbox or climbing a ladder, your muscles create metabolic waste, specifically uric acid. When you are 20, your blood flow flushes that waste away instantly. When you are 70, that waste sits in the muscle tissue. It creates a deep, lingering soreness that lasts for 3 days after you mow the lawn. You end up taking ibuprofen like candy just to get through the week, which ruins your stomach. Megan showed me a set of data observing older men who suffered from chronic, unexplained leg fatigue and soreness. The men who consumed tart cherries showed a dramatic, measurable clearing of uric acid from their lower extremities. The waste was being chemically flushed out of the muscle belly. Your body accumulates oxidative stress over the decades. It is literally internal rust that coats your cells and prevents them from generating energy. You can eat all the protein in the world, but if your cells are covered in rust, they cannot process it. Blueberries contain the highest level of specific antioxidants that chemically bind to that rust and strip it out of your body. I started eating a cup of frozen wild blueberries every single day. I would mix them right into that evening cottage cheese. And this is where the real lasting relief finally set in for me. The change was not some sudden overnight miracle. You do not wake up the next morning feeling like you were 30 years old again. That is not how the human body works. And anyone who tells you otherwise is trying to sell you a lie. But what does happen is a slow, undeniable lifting of a heavy burden. I woke up one morning, swung my legs over the side of the bed, put my bare feet on the hardwood floor, and realized that the deep, aching weakness that usually greeted me was completely gone. I walked down the hallway and my legs felt light. They felt clean. The quiet hesitation that used to make me second guess whether I should carry a heavy box of tools out of the garage was replaced by a solid, quiet trust in my own body. I felt like a man who had finally read the operator's manual for a heavy machine he had been driving blind for years. If you are sitting there right now and you know exactly what that quiet weakness in your thighs feels like when you try to stand up, or if you know the sheer panic of feeling your leg give out on a set of public bleachers, I want you to hear me clearly. You do not have to just accept the decline. Your body is not failing you out of spite or punishment. It is just crying out for the specific raw materials it desperately needs to run an older engine. Do not try to change your entire diet by tomorrow morning. That never works. Just pick one thing. Start with the 3 eggs tomorrow morning to turn the engine on, or buy a bag of frozen blueberries to start stripping the rust out of your system. Give your foundation a fighting chance. The absolute, unavoidable truth of getting older is this: your independence begins and ends with the strength of your legs. If your legs go, your freedom goes right along with them. Do not wait until you are stuck on a staircase holding up the line to start taking this seriously. Protect what you have left and rebuild what you thought you had lost forever. I am going to head out to the front porch now. The wooden railing needs fixing, and I have the solid footing to stand out there and do the work myself. I appreciate you sitting here and spending this time with me. Take care of yourself, start making these changes today, and I will be right here when you are ready to talk again.